The question we usually start off with to get the ball rolling is to have you tell us a little bit about how you developed your feminism. How did your feminism, sometimes we phrase it in terms of your feminist identity, if that's something that kind of makes sense, but how did you develop into a feminist?
Well, the personal was political, fortunately, by the time I was about 20.
Right.
And the time was perfect, and I'm sure it's absolutely key
Okay.
to what happened to me in that period of my life. And it was very much through my own experiences of finding out how I was treated as a woman. And then the ideas were there to be found. I remember the first time this friend of mine actually mentioned a book which had something like sex role stereotyping in the title. As an American book, and I didn't really pay attention to it. I mean, I did not grow up as a feminist. I mean, and it wasn't right at the beginning. I can't remember what year this would have been, but probably the early 70s. Thinking, what's that? And it was hanging around, and I hadn't actually looked at it. And this man that I was in a relationship with at the time picked it up and said, "What's that?" And I immediately thought it might be more interesting than I'd thought before, because I didn't know particularly why, but there was that kind of defensive charge in the way he said this, which made me think, okay, there's something to this.
Might be something interesting in there.
But that was, was just one tiny little thing. But I think looking back now, the other thing is that my mother, who was not from a feminist generation at all. She was that post-war generation who got married and started having children immediately after the Second World War. She is her own person and always has been. And of course, I grew up with that, taking it completely for granted. But the way she lived what was actually a very conventional life in respect to being married and having children and not ever having a paid job after the war, was actually exemplary in terms of her sense of freedom, equality and self-esteem. And I think I must have just taken that from her without realising it. So there was no way I was ever going to let a man oppress me. I mean, it just, I just would have noticed straight away that was somehow unfair.
Somehow she imparted to you a very strong sense of yourself in the way that she
But in a very taken for granted way, so it wasn't even something I had to fight for, actually.
Right. Yeah. Well, could you pause that for a second? You mentioned that you'd also had certain experiences in which it was brought to your attention that there was, that you were treated differently because you were a woman. Can you recall what some of those experiences might have been?
Well, I remember later when I was in Japan and this conversation going on between the men. We'd met. I was with my partner at the time, and we were staying with a friend of his, male, and he was introducing us to friends, and I might as well not have been there. And I was just unused to that. Oh, and something else. I mean, that's skipping ahead a bit, but going back to when I graduated, I very foolishly got married, and my new husband and I were looking to decide where to live. He had a university job, and we went to a hall warden kind of post kind of thing to look at it. And the woman took me into the kitchen to show me the kitchen, and the man took him round whatever he took, and I noticed. And it surprised me. I mean, I was sufficiently naive to not expect that, because by that epoch, and I mean, I was at university from 68 to 71, so it was very new times. It was very revolutionary and sort of, critical, and women, young women at that age could just take for granted that they were in equal territory to the young men who came. But then something had changed, and I associated that with my marital status. The other thing was that the moment I got married, some official government agency wrote to me as Mrs. and then my married name, And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And they insisted that I changed it on my passport. And I then, and I mean, I'm just stubborn, and I then entered a battle with them about keeping my own name. I was not Mrs. Croft. I absolutely was not. That was my mother-in-law, you know. And so after the first 3 months, which is how long it took me to realise what was happening, I changed back all the official places, and I had the argument with the passport agency. And in that passport, it said on the very back page, Wendy Hollway is the wife of Mr. Because they wouldn't let it be.
No.
I mean, obviously it would now, but, you know, we're talking about 1971.
Right.
So
So a lot of
these
this,
little
yeah,
personal things when
yeah.
you discover that you're not your own person, and
Right.
you know, you should be.